In the Pokemon community, there are many a mystery. Some we'll probably never get answers to, but others, after many years, have been solved. Ladakin is easily the most popular of any beta Pokemon due to its insane appearance. At the 2012 Game On Expo in Brazil, some early concept art for Ruby and Sapphire was on display, but this piece lived on the most over the years. Featuring a flying Pokemon fans had assumed was a precursor to both Latias and Blaziken, but in a crazy turn of events, the Terra leak revealed that it was only the precursor to Blaziken. Latios and Latias had already existed independently of this alleged fusion. Ruby and Sapphire sprite art from early 2002 shows Ladakin, or L-Hawk, featured in Hoenn's roster as its own species. Latios and Latias were also in this early 2002 lineup, albeit with slightly different appearances, but they would have already been fully fleshed out at least a year before this. The two debuted in the Pokemon Heroes movie, which came out in July of 2002, which means their designs and abilities had to have been set in stone sometime in early 2001, factoring in the average production time of an animated feature-length film. And as I said, L-Hawk was intended to be a completely separate species way after this, not being repurposed into Blaziken until May of 2002. We can even see a rough timeline of its transformation via Sugimori's art. L-Hawk most likely got repurposed because of its apparent similarities to Latias, but they also must have known they had cooked with this design and didn't want to just scrap it altogether. So it was reworked and then reworked again into our final Blaziken. Legends Arceus is the Pokemon equivalent of the guy who peaked in high school, who's constantly bringing up that game-winning touchdown he made. There were certain times they celebrated Hisui in cool ways, like with Perrin's questline in Teal Mask, but man, I rolled my eyes when I walked into the Lumiose Museum and saw what amounted to Game Freak copy and pasting existing assets from the last Legends game going, "Remember Legends Arceus?" They were even somehow able to miraculously recover Volo's iconic outfit to display prominently. Man, talk about a disregard for continuity. Wait, what the fuck? Volo is, without a doubt, one of the coolest villains we've ever gotten. The literal Antichrist wearing a smile on his face while being responsible for the end of the world. Legends Arceus introduced a ton of fun questions regarding Volo, Kogata, and their implied immortality, especially with Volo's parting words to us. "Someday, I'll solve every riddle in the legends of Hisui's Pokemon, and on that day, I'll stand before Arceus at last. No, I will conquer it, no matter how many years, how many decades, how many centuries it takes me." Now on the surface level, this could be taken as Volo being a sore loser after getting his ass beat by a teenager, but Legends Arceus introduced time travel and immortality, and Volo was already able to utilize the power of an Eldritch being to manipulate reality once, almost destroying the world in the process. Sure, we stopped him this time, but he said it himself. He would spend centuries trying to find another way. Which brings us to Mega Dimensions. They confirmed Volo was not just alive in modern day, he was in Lumiose. They had the opportunity to insert Volo as the main antagonist, being responsible for the creation of hyperspace and making good on his promise. As he delved further into the legends of Sinnoh, he could have discovered the power of Darkrai. Hyperspace is even kind of similar to the Distortion world aesthetically. Darkrai is also a very creepy Pokemon like Giratina. Hell, Volo even has the same haircut as it. This is all an afterthought though. I shouldn't let myself get too sidetracked because all that matters is Volo is alive. We don't know how he did it or where he is, but Volo was not lying with his parting words. Centuries later, he is still manipulating the events of the world. For all we know, he could have been responsible for setting Darkrai off. It is quite the coincidence that a Pokemon from Sinnoh's mythology showed up in Lumiose soon after Volo was also confirmed to be in the city. I think I just set myself up for disappointment because I went into the DLC knowing about Mega Darkrai and assumed Volo would be wielding it. But at the very least, we know he's somehow alive, lurking, plotting, and will hopefully return for another painfully difficult boss fight. The 6th generation was the first time in Pokemon history we didn't get any form of definitive version or follow-ups for the newest games, but there were certainly signs that would have been the case. The games themselves certainly had their share of holes that could have been rounded out with the 3rd version, but mostly these clues would show up in the following generation. Other than Mega Evolution, Sun and Moon was completely disconnected from X and Y in almost every way but one, Zygarde. Zygarde randomly popped up on these tropical islands and was given a bunch of new forms and lore implications as almost an afterthought afterthought. It was odd how much they fleshed out a legendary from Kalos' trio in the next set of games, acting as an awkward fourth wheel. People have long speculated these forms were intended to be part of a lost Pokémon Z game, eventually being recycled because Zygarde is awesome and Game Freak didn't want its legacy to be a random slug-looking thing lurking in a cave. Well, Pokémon Z was real, and we even know some of the plot beats and can confirm these forms were created as counters to the Kalos box legends. Zygarde is described as the overseer of Xerneas and Yveltal, keeping them both in check. If one brings extinction or the other overpopulation, it exists to maintain the balance, which is alluded to in its X and Y Pokédex entries. One notes how it monitors those who destroy the ecosystem, and the other tells us if the ecosystem eventually falls into disarray, it appears to reveal its secret power, a power that was going to be a focal point of Pokémon Z. In this game, the Zygarde cells would have played a much more integral role. Being parts of itself, it spread throughout Kalos to monitor everything that was going on. From what we can gather, both Xerneas and Yveltal would have gone somewhat berserk in Pokémon Z, at least enough for Zygarde to take on unique forms designed to counter the abilities of each. A predatory form described as a large feline or wolf creature who acts as Xerneas' hunter, and a humanoid form with anti-aircraft weaponry to hunt Yveltal. It could have been a black 2 white 2 deal where each game focused around a specific form going after its respective legend. These forms were later repurposed into its 10% and complete forms, but originally these would have been equal in power and could be seen as two separate 100% forms. Knowing this now, it's cool to see how they kept some of these aspects. 1,000 Arrows, a ground type move that hits flying types, was its anti-aircraft counter to Yveltal, and 1,000 Waves is a containing move designed to trap Xerneas, playing into the hunter-prey dynamic. While we're talking about Gen 6, Mega Jynx is something community member Matt Yukana originally found breadcrumbs of way back in February of 2020. At this point, Matt wasn't sure if this was the cry of a cut Mega or a potential Galarian form. Almost exactly 4 years later, in February of 2024, he revealed he had gotten his hands on files from an early build of Pokemon Home. In these files, he was able to confirm without a shadow of a doubt the cry belonged to Mega Jynx, due to the naming conventions of the audio files. Here you have normal Jynx, then a second Jynx cry, prefaced with M01. Scrolling down a smidge, we can see the same naming convention for Pinsir and its mega form. So after years, we finally had the confirmation, but this form was still shrouded in some mystery. Why did it get cut, and what did it look like? Questions that would be answered later that same year. We got a full piece of turnaround concept art and their specific reasoning for cutting it. The way this is worded is really funny, but even ignoring the minstrel elephant in the room, which even Game Freak knew was impossible, Jynx is just a badly designed Pokemon. I was never bummed it didn't get an evolution like Electabuzz and Magmortar, and I do not care that we missed out on this mega form. I'm just surprised it got this far down the development pipeline. In Pokemon Ultra Moon, Wailmer's Pokédex entry states, due to their memories of when they once lived on land, pods of them will, very rarely, wash up on shore. This is the first allusion to some kind of evolutionary offshoot of Wailmer, which would be further elaborated on in Gen 9 with Citadel's Scarlet Pokédex entry. This species left the ocean and began living on land a very long time ago. It seems to be closely related to Wailmer. This certainly implies some kind of connection between the two. They're both whale Pokemon and are elemental relatives. But there's a missing link between these species, a link that would be uncovered during the Terra leak. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, there was originally planned to be a second kind of variant. These would have been extinct offshoots of existing Pokemon we revived from fossils. One of these would have been a subspecies of the Wailmer line who adapted to live on land, and were said to be hunted to extinction since they weren't fast enough to flee predators. But not all of them died. Some of them returned to the ocean like Wailmer's Ultra Moon entry states, while others must have remained on land and hardened through natural selection over many generations to adopt the ice typing, eventually becoming the Citadels of modern Paldea. It's funny how these two Pokédex entries allude to this connection, but without the Terra leak we would have never known about this missing link that got hunted to near extinction. I try to include a mix of in-universe mysteries and ones that circulated community discussions. I'm sure I missed other mysteries that have been solved, so be sure to let me know in the comments. Definitely not just asking because it gives me engagement.